Hello everyone, a very warm welcome and greetings from Abu Dhabi. My name is Ehtesham Shahid and I am an editor, researcher and analyst based in the United Arab Emirates. First of all, I take this opportunity to thank Dr. Uchenna Ekwo, Dr. Robert Sheikh, Dr. David Monda, Gabriel Gershowitz and all those involved in organizing this very important and impressive gathering. I'm truly honored to share stage with you with such an elite panel of experts, academics and speakers. Albeit remotely, I sincerely hope to be with you next time. I've been asked to address a topic that sits at the intersection of media, democracy, and international relations, global media coverage of the United States elections. I aim to highlight key aspects of this coverage, its challenges, its potential to shape global democratic discourse. I'll use some real world examples to ground these insights. My first reaction to the topic was, why now, when the elections are over and the results are out? However, I stand corrected. It's time for introspection, considering the many dimensions of this election to understand what the media did or missed, and perhaps what it should have done differently. Allow me to go back 8 years, 2 presidential elections to be precise. It was Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton in 2016. It was a fiery election, like most US elections are. The world watched with bated breath as Donald Trump truly arrived on the global stage. It was exciting for some and absolutely shocking for others. One comment from that time stayed with me because it relates to the media and the topic we are addressing today. And I quote, "It took 20 years of dumbing down of the media to get someone like Trump." Someone said. I don't want to get into the right or wrong aspect of that statement. However, it definitely compelled me to reflect, which is what we are trying to do today. Most of us outside the United States didn't know what to expect from a US election then and don't know yet, perhaps. From a media perspective, the 2016 Trump-Clinton face-off was perhaps the first election when we witnessed the phenomenon of digital tribes. The term actually acquired a new dimension during this election. The classical definition of a digital tribe is a group of individuals from a community or identity through shared interests, values, or activities. But digital platforms and social media facilitate them. So far, so good. However, during that election, it was vividly illustrated that the power of digital tribes and how it shapes political discourse, mobilizing voters, and perhaps more importantly, amplifying polarization. They built ecosystems in which members of each tribe, the Clinton tribe and the Trump tribe, engaged with themselves and not the other side. So a Trump supporter was only talking to Trump supporters and listening to a Trump supporter and vice versa. As a result, they perpetuated biases, prejudices, and even bigotry. All of these were getting amplified and the culture of dialogue that we associate with elections was undermined. Some were missing in action. The US presidential election is often regarded as the most closely watched political event globally. It resonates worldwide, shapes opinions, policies, and perceptions of democracy. However, do media narratives from diverse geopolitical contexts influence this perception? And what role does global media play in holding up a mirror to the world's most powerful democracy? Let's try and answer those questions. I believe media narratives and their impact depend on various factors. Let me first go through some superficial factors. To begin with, media coverage of US election earns revenues. It's a mega event that sells ads and consolidates eyeballs. Then comes celebrity endorsements and their coverage. During the most recent elections, for instance, famous people like Elon Musk, Taylor Swift, and Beyonce stood out, making headlines worldwide. Elon Musk is a fascinating case study considering he owns one of the most prominent and pervasive social media platforms. But media coverage often diverges based on geopolitical interests. For instance, European outlets like the Guardian or Le Monde frequently emphasize democratic norms, social justice, and environmental policies, framing elections as a test of America's commitment to these liberal ideals. So it was not surprising that a newspaper in France chose this headline, "Every reason to fear the future." Le Monde also headlined, "Democracy put to the test in the US." Another headline, this time from a British newspaper, caught my attention. It said, "Bewilderment at the polls in Tinderbox America." Interesting choice of words, isn't it? There were also examples of nations often projecting their biases through election coverage. So, state controlled media outlets in Russia and China focused on controversies like claims of voter suppression to question US democratic stability. Allow me to spend some time talking about the Middle East, which is where I live. As a neutral observer of a long drawn conflict, I have witnessed the regional media's turmoil and dilemma. During this election, for instance, networks like Al Jazeera and Al Arabiya struggled to focus on foreign policy implications, particularly how US leadership impacts regional stability, conflicts, and alliances. A- Overall, a feeling of resignation pervades in the regions associated with elections. It is often reflected in its media. The region lives with a foregone conclusion that no matter who the candidate is and what they represent ideologically, the elected president will always bend over backwards to accommodate Israeli interests and not Arab interests. This time around, it was not very different. There were mild speculations over which candidate could potentially end the cycle of violence, but they were more desperate hopes than rational expectations. Whether it's a fair perception or not is perhaps the subject of another debate. And only time will tell whether their prayers have been answered and whether what they hoped for is materialized. However, it's almost bizarre seeing body counts due to conflicts rising constantly, yet pinning hopes on an election thousands of miles away. It is humbling, disturbing, and frustrating even from a media's neutral perspective. Coverage in outlets like China Daily or India Today reflects economic concerns, emphasizing trade policies, technological competition, cultural bridges, and immigration, stuff like that. In Asia, Biden's win in the last election prompted discussions about the United States' role in counterbalancing China's rise. This aspect was widely reported in Indian and the Japanese media that time around. That discourse has remained the same. However, it is unfair to expect all the global conflicts from Gaza to Ukraine to Sudan to South China Sea, all of them reflected in the United States elections. Stakeholders in all these conflicts had their eyes on the outcome of this election, of course. They knew that whoever won this election would substantially impact the course of events in these conflicts. Ukraine, for instance, considering what the outcome of this election meant for them, one of their media outlets deeply analyzed what happens in either scenarios, including in one case the best and worst House Republicans for Ukraine and their chances of re-election. Even Europe eagerly awaited the outcome of the US election because the transatlantic alliance came under stress during Trump's first presidency. The media on the continent toggled between potential outcome of the election and what it means for their US EU trade and, of course, bilateral trade relations. In Latin America, it was more about US immigration policy, given the large number of people who migrate to the United States from that part of the world, legally or otherwise. Those looking to cross borders would have perhaps hoped walls not greet them, and the media is generally sympathetic towards their flight. A key determinant of the global reaction is the background of people running for office, believe it or not. So, a Kamala Harris had to garner attention in Asia, more precisely India, as much as Barack Obama did in Africa. Even though social media is a different beast altogether, it definitely deserves a mention here. The role of social media has been critical for various reasons. Platforms like Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook have amplified global narratives' reach while introducing disinformation risks. International audiences consume and contribute to election coverage through viral memes, hashtags, and live commentaries. Global media often reflect the partisan divides of US politics. Some outlets lean heavily into ideological narratives portraying candidates as either saviors or villains. While common in domestic media, this polarization becomes an export when echoed on global platforms. It's important to note that global coverage of the US elections also comes with challenges. International coverage can sometimes distort the reality of US elections, projecting the bias of the home country. For example, authoritarian regimes may highlight election controversies to undermine democratic ideals globally. The media is often guilty of focusing on dramatic debates, scandals, and polling numbers. That often overshadows substantive discussions on policy. Another challenge is posed by the coordinated efforts to influence narratives through fake news. Now, we've also witnessed fake news, and now we have an even more cynical version called the deep fake, marring elections, election coverage, and eroding trust in credible journalism. These persistent challenges also present some opportunities for global media to enrich democratic discourse, which brings me to the best practices part. We can also call them recommendations. Promoting transparency and highlighting the strengths and weaknesses of the electoral process can inspire improvements in democratic governance worldwide. The media can facilitate dialogue by amplifying more diverse perspectives. It can bridge gaps between US policies and international concerns. In other words, it can educate audiences by contextualizing complex electoral processes and fostering a deeper understanding of democratic mechanisms. Here are my concluding thoughts on the subject, basically summing up the points I've tried to make. While examining global media coverage of US elections, one thing must remain clear. This coverage is not merely a reflection of events, but an active participant in shaping the narratives of democracy. As media professionals, scholars, and citizens, we must demand more nuanced, equitable, and factual reporting, coverage that upholds the principles of democratic governance, not just in the United States, but worldwide. I have one more concluding thought, which goes something like this. The global media's coverage of the US election is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it fosters dialogue, transparency, and shared values, while on the other, it risks amplifying biases, misinformation, and polarization. The US election remains a pivotal moment in global media. It is also a reflection of democracy's challenges and triumphs. However, at a micro level, the coverage of US elections differ from country to country. It changes from newspaper to newspaper, news channel to news channel, depending on the choices made by editors, proprietors, and of course, readers. In some cases, censors also play a bigger role. Collectively, let us ensure that our coverage inspires trust, understanding, and progress in democratic governance worldwide. I want to close with a newspaper headline that made me smile. It hopes, I hope it brings a smile to yours too. Dawn is America's most wanted, it said. So while America deals with Trump 2.0, the world media will and should continue to do its job, keep an eye on the unfolding events, and as I said earlier, and I quote myself, educate audiences by contextualizing complex electoral processes and fostering a deeper understanding of democratic mechanisms. That wraps up my intervention on the subject. I once again thank the organizers for making me part of this important discourse. Thank you very much. See you next time. Bye bye.